Hello, and welcome to the Nonfiction Kidlit Craft Conversations podcast, where we take a deep dive into the craft and business of children's nonfiction featuring new release authors. I'm your host, Kirsten Larson, author of Reimagining Your Nonfiction Picture Book. Today, I have with me the creative team behind Alpacas Here, Alpacas There. I have author Carrie Tillotson, and dialing in, I have Mariana Llanos, a picture book author and authenticity reader on the book. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Kirsten.
Carrie, can you introduce yourself and the book that we're talking about today?
Sure. So I'm Carrie Tillotson. I'm a picture book author. I write nonfiction and fiction picture books. And my book today is Alpacas Here, Alpacas There. Obviously, it's about alpacas. It's really about alpacas being born and raised in South America and in North America. And it's kind of a compare and contrast how they live in different places, with also like a little message towards how people live in different places, but we all have similarities.
Yeah, and I should say it's told in rhyme as well. So tell me a little bit about your inspiration for this project and what made it a story that you felt you really had to tell.
That's a great question. So, about 15 years ago, I was on a trip with my sister up through Washington State, and we drove past this farm filled with these adorable, fluffy creatures in the field. And we were like, what is this farm? We have to stop and find out what these animals are because neither one of us had ever seen alpacas before. And of course, we discovered alpacas and we fed them grass and chatted with the farmers. And ever since then, I have been smitten. Like, I thought I wanted an alpaca farm. I started buying up books about how to start my own farm. And of course, then I realized you need a lot of land, which where I live costs a lot of money. They eat grass and hay, and I'm allergic to grass and hay. So I was like, well, maybe an alpaca farm isn't a great idea for me. And, in the meantime, I had started writing for children, and I thought, I know how I can bring alpacas into my life is I can write a book about them. And so really it was just sort of a fun passion project, I guess. I've always loved animals since I was little, so it just felt natural.
Well, and I mean, they are absolutely adorable. For the readers on YouTube, you can see the cover of the book over Carrie's shoulder, and I mean, they're absolutely adorable. So no wonder you were smitten and had to write about them. I love that. So also, illustrator Elisa Chavari is originally from Lima, Peru. So how did she become attached to the project? Was it your recommendation that you have somebody from Peru illustrate the book, or was that your editor's idea? How did Elisa come to the project?
Yeah, so my editor, Andrea Welch, she's with Beach Lane Books, had asked me for suggestions for illustrators. And so I got online and started searching. And I really did want to have someone from Peru, because I knew that there would just be some extra cultural details that they would be able to put in that might not otherwise make it into the book, which I have to say Elisa did an amazing job with. But yeah, I started searching online and I came across Elisa's work, and I also was smitten with her work. It's so bright and so colorful, and just I love everything about her work. And so I suggested her, and thankfully everyone agreed she was a great fit, and thankfully she said yes.
It's a really cool how everything came together to ensure cultural accuracy for this book.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that, you might not know just if you don't have this knowledge or if you haven't talked with Elisa, for example, but if you look through the Peruvian people in the book, there are so many different cultural articles of clothing that people are wearing. And from my understanding, like the traditional clothing is very specific to the region where people live. And so I don't know enough to be able to say like this clothing is from this region or this clothing is from this region, but I do see that in the book that there's all these different styles. And so if anyone has questions about it, ask Elisa. But I think it's really awesome that she did that.
Yeah, that's what, like little Easter eggs in the book
Yeah.
and the
Mhm.
illustrations. That's really cool. So, Carrie, at what point in the project did you realize that it would be really important to bring in Mariana to ensure cultural authenticity? Was this before or after Beach Lane purchased the book?
So that's a really great question. I realized before the book was acquired that I wanted to have an authenticity reader. Um, but it wasn't until the book got acquired that I actually sought that out. Um, this manuscript is probably one of the longest ones I've ever worked on. This was one of the stories I started when I first started writing seriously for children. And so it was back in 2015, 10 years ago.
Wow.
And, I was a newbie writer. I really didn't know what I was doing. And I was kind of just getting aware of the We Need Diverse Books movement. And as I was writing the story, I started to learn more about how important it is to, have cultural authenticity. And I thought, gosh, I am writing a little bit, well, not a little bit, I'm writing half the story outside of my lived experience. And so I knew that that was really important. And then it was, once Beach Lane wanted to purchase the book, then I had that conversation with Andrea, our editor, and she said, yeah, I think that would be great. And so I think I did one round of edits with Andrea first, and then we came to Mariana, and she obviously helped tremendously in making sure that, that the things I was writing were authentic to Peruvians and I'm sure Mariana can tell us a lot more about her part of.
Yeah, well, and that's what I want to pivot to now. So, Mariana, I want to talk about what you do. You are a multi published picture book author in your own right. And then for this particular book, you have worked as an authenticity reader. I believe you also do translation. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit like what is the work of an authenticity reader and why is that work so important? And then we can talk about your role on the book.
Absolutely. So I think the role of an authenticity reader is to make sure that readers in that culture are going to have a good experience and that they are going to see themselves in the book as well and their world. And also to bring a little bit of peace of mind to the person who is writing outside their culture, to you don't have to have an authenticity reader, so that's not something that is required. So a person who wants to have one, I think, is a person who is um always aware, and I do praise that about Carrie, having that thought of, okay, maybe I need someone to help me with that extra set of eyes and making sure that I am you know saying things correctly too. And my also my way of thinking about this is, I don't want anyone to feel like they can't write about certain themes, because you hear that said a lot. "No, nowadays we can't write about anything," but it's not true. It's good when there's research and when it is well thought out, and having a person helping you with that process is always a plus.
Well, and I agree. I mean, I always think of it as part of being factually accurate, which is what we strive to do in nonfiction. It is really important work. And so tell me a little bit about the process that you go through. So you get Carrie's manuscript, and then what sort of work are you doing with the manuscript when you see it? And are you also looking at the illustrations?
Well, no, in the case of Carrie's work, I only looked at the manuscript. I didn't see the illustrations. So it's different in every work, obviously. Sometimes they want you at different stages. And I think in this case is, since Elisa Chavarri is Peruvian too, they trusted her judgment, when it came to and her research as well. Because it's also important. You were saying about research. It's also important to know that not because we're from Peru, we're necessarily from the same region where the book is set, or
Mhm.
that we've lived with llamas in our lives. So we
Right.
have to research as well. So and that's something very important. It's not Peru is also a multicultural country. So we have to respect that. And, I know illustrators do their job, also researching. So I think I saw her manuscript. My process is, I think it's simple. In a picture book, I read the story. I, just first as a reader, as a regular reader, and then I try to make notes about what can be potentially questionable, right? Like, okay, so, or what can I add from my perspective as a Peruvian? Or if I were in that region, what would I like to see? And what would I like to hear? And, but my main job, I think, was to help Carrie contact Max, who
Mm.
was the person who actually lives in Arequipa, and he has not him personally, but his grandparents had a llama ranch. He's actually a tour guide, but he spends a lot of time in the region, so he's more knowledgeable of the geography and everything. So I think my main job was a little bit to be a bridge between Kerry and Max, and help with a little bit of those details there.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you kind of help with that research process. That's really cool. And so, Carrie, are there any specific changes or additions that you made once you worked with Mariana and Max to the manuscript? Can you tell us a little bit about how the manuscript changed once you all were in touch?
Yeah, for sure. So I had to kind of go back and read through, the pre-Mariana versions and the post-Mariana versions. Really, one of the biggest changes that was made was the opening stanza of the manuscript. So before it said, alpacas here, alpacas there, relax and rest in mama's care. And now there's a kind of a pre-stanza before it starts out. Beneath the brilliant starry sky, where mountains soar and condors fly, some early people took great care of creatures with warm fleece to share. And then the opening prose talks about how alpacas were domesticated by early Peruvians from, almost 6,000 years ago. And one of the things that Mariana had said after reading the manuscript was how important alpacas are to Peruvian culture. And, here in the United States, they're a cute animal, but to the indigenous people of Peru, that's like a survival part of, their life. They rely on alpacas for warmth, they eat them for food. They use their dung for fertilizer. And so all of that information was in the manuscript, but it was kind of like buried or tucked in other places. And one of the things Mariana said was, is there a way to like highlight this and bring this out a little bit more? And I think that was awesome to get this better opening and sort of a better setup for the whole book. Um, and so for me, that's at least the one thing that stands out in my mind the most. I know there were lots of other changes that she suggested, and they were all amazing. And
No, that's a great example.
yeah, also with Max, Mariana was so wonderful in connecting me with Max. Not only did she connect us, she translated for us.
Oh, wow.
Max speaks Spanish. I speak a tiny bit of Spanish, but not enough to have a conversation. And so she met with us. We all met on WhatsApp, maybe? I forget how we did that, but
Yes, it was WhatsApp. Yes, it
yeah.
was mostly used there in Peru. So yeah.
Yeah. And that was really helpful. I know I have like a whole list of notes from that conversation, and I have like photos that Max sent about the different types of grasses, because I had a question about, is this the right type of grass or is it this type of grass? And in the end, I just ended up saying they eat grass.
Right.
Like Mariana said, there's a bunch of different cultures in Peru, and there's a bunch of different, mini ecosystems, and, they eat, even in the US, they probably eat slightly differently here in Oregon than they might eat in Oklahoma. So,
Right. It's always interesting to see what talking to experts brings into the manuscript. I always think talking to experts is so great for those specific details and sensory details about a place that you may not get just from research. So it's really interesting, like how specific you were getting with your grasses.
yeah, uh, I was wanting to say there's a type of grass called ichu grass, which is like it's a tough grass, is my understanding.
It is what grows in the Andes, and
Okay.
because with that altitude, yeah, it can be pretty dead. But there are different types of grasses depending on how high or low you are, closer to the ocean, or what region you are. So yeah, so I think it was fantastic to have Max who lives there, to help with that, and he also travels to that all through all the region where they have llamas. So he was a great addition.
He was so helpful.
So, Mariana, when you're working as an authenticity reader, are you doing a single pass of the manuscript and then you're handing it over to Carrie, or are you doing multiple passes as the manuscript changes?
With Carrie, I think I did one pass through the manuscript, and then the rest of the work was working with Max.
Okay. Okay. And then just for those, now that we're talking a little bit about this part of research and accuracy when it comes to nonfiction, if we have readers who want to hire authenticity or sensitivity readers, is there like a centralized resource or a way for people to connect and find out about different readers and the services that they offer?
At this point, at least my experience is that it is word of mouth. So, for example, right now I'm working with an hopeful author, helping him with his novel that is set in Peru. And with him, I'm doing several passes. So it's a little bit of a different process than it was with Carrie. But and this is a novel for young adult, not a picture book. So, but I think it's a little bit of word of mouth. In that case of this other author, I think the agent posted it on Twitter and someone tagged me. And so that's how it came to be. And with Carrie, I think someone recommended her to me. But once I think the publishers know you, they know who to call for this type of requests.
Okay, so definitely talk to your agent, talk to your
Yes.
publisher about connecting with the right person. All right.
Yes, even in these author groups that we have like Kidlit 411 or whatever other groups, posting the question there, where can I get a sensitivity reader for this and this specifics. I think it's always where you're gonna get the better word of mouth.
Right. Okay. And then do you have any kind of final advice for authors or illustrators working outside their own lived experience? Other helpful tips for ensuring accuracy, which is so important in nonfiction?
I would say just do your research, be thorough, read lots of books, but not just books. Read science articles, talk to people, talk to like real people doing or, with the lived experience or doing the thing that you're researching. Um, if you are writing outside your culture, work with a sensitivity reader. Like once I realized that, first of all, that I might have made some mistakes in the manuscript by not just from my lack of knowledge, and also some worries about like the perception of me writing outside my culture, I was like, oh, did I make a mistake? And I thought, well, I don't think so, but here's what I can do to make it even better is work with the right people. And so if that's something you want to do, I highly recommend it. And I feel like I had a great experience with Mariana, so I hope she feels the same too.
Mariana, do you have any tips for people writing outside their lived experience and how to ensure accuracy besides hiring people like yourself?
Yes, and I do think that Carrie's being a little bit hard on herself. I don't think she made any mistakes. I think that Carrie did a wonderful job with her manuscript. The words were amazing. The story was beautiful already. And what I think I took on myself was to enrich the story. So make sure that when you find someone you're working with, it's like you are finding someone who loves your story too. Not only that they want the job, but also they like the story and they care for it enough to want to add more layers to it. And also for writers writing outside their culture, I think it's not to be afraid, but do your research. Do your research, be thorough, and yes, I enjoy the process, learning more about the culture. but most importantly, be open-minded to the criticism, to the feedback that is going to come from the other person, because that is the goal is to, to have a gorgeous book out in the world.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Mariana. So on a totally separate topic, Carrie,
Yeah.
I know that you have a very interesting story about how this book came to be written in rhyme and how you made the decision to rhyme versus telling your story in prose. So, would you be willing to share that with our listeners?
Sure. Yes, it's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try not to be too long. So this was one of the earliest manuscripts I worked on when I was writing for children, and I initially wanted to write it in rhyme, and it was called maybe it was just called Alpacas in the Andes. At that time, I was just writing about, alpacas living in the Andes. I hadn't connected to the compare and contrast structure yet. So I had my story written in rhyme and I took it to an SCBWI conference, I think one of my very first ones. And I had a critique with an editor and she read through it and, was giving me feedback. And she's like, well, I really like the topic and I really like, what you're doing here, but how about you write it in prose? Which means, I learned later means your rhyme isn't very good. Which is true. I learned later because I had lots of like forced rhyme and I had very inconsistent meter and the beats were all off. So anyway, I went back and wrote it in prose and that editor had asked me to submit it to her with a revision. So I rewrote it, sent it to her and she passed and anyway, so I kept working for years, a few more years on this prose version. And I got it to this point where by then it was in the compare and contrast structure. And I think I had titled it like Alpacas in Oregon, Alpacas in Peru. And everything about it was not working for me. I was like, I don't know what happened. I don't like it. And now what? And one of my critique partners is the amazing Hannah Holt. She's also a picture book author. Anyway, her suggestion was like, well, what if you call it Alpacas Here, Alpacas There? And I was like, that is a great title. And then I was like, well, this title is lending itself to rhyme. I was like, I felt in my heart like the book needed to rhyme. And so I was like, okay, now I'm going to dive in and really figure out how to make this book rhyme and do it right and do it well. And so I went on this little journey and, it took a few more years to get it right. And but, by then I had an agent and she was putting together her submission list. And I said, hey, could we add this one editor to the list? She's seen it before, but a completely different version. And it was like, I don't know, by then maybe 7 years had passed. And so my agent said, yeah, we'll send it to her. And then that's who bought the book.
Oh my gosh. That is, I think what I love about this story is the fact that you listened to your heart and you knew what the
Mhm.
book needed. And so you kind of respected your creative vision. I feel like that's what I'm always encouraging writers because we can get so much conflicting advice from
Mhm.
critique partners, from experts in the industry. And I feel like it's so important to kind of filter it through our own creative vision as well.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like, it might take me 7 years to listen to myself, or, it might take that long to gain the skills to be able to do what your heart is telling you. But I do feel like there's something to be said for following that initial intuition, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on this absolutely adorable book. You and Mariana and Elisa, you should all be commended. I recommend it to
Thank you.
this book to everybody. So tell us, Carrie, I'm going to drop everybody's websites in the show notes so you can connect with Mariana, Elisa, and Carrie. But where is a good place for people to connect with you and buy this book, Carrie?
Oh, sure. So I'm online at my website is carrietillotson.com, and I'm also on Instagram, so you can see me posting about books and my dogs and a few random things. I'm a track coach, so there might be a track post here or there. And if you want to buy my books, I recommend Annie Bloom's books from Portland, Oregon, because I can hop in and sign any copies for you. And I have a link on my website, and anywhere you can find me, you can find the link to Annie Bloom's books to get a personalized copy.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Carrie. I really, really appreciate it. I think this has been so insightful for people to hear from you and to hear from Mariana about how we can bring cultural authenticity to our books.
When a group comes together, we make it better.
Thank you for listening. To get the full transcript of this podcast, sign up for my newsletter at KirstenWLarson.com. It will be sent out with the next mailing. All backlist episodes are available via the Nonfiction Kidlit Craft Conversations page on my website. You can watch on YouTube or listen wherever you get your podcast. Are you enjoying the podcast? Please consider leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts to help more nonfiction lovers discover it. Join me next time when I speak to author Michelle Cusalito, who has 2 new books, Jellyfish Scientist and In the World of Whales. We're going to be talking about revision strategies. Until next time.